I stumbled upon 3 disturbing true stories that turned my nights into a terrifying nightmare. I never should have opened that door. It was just a door, right? But I felt it. The chill creeping through the cracks. The whispers swirling around me. I hesitated, heart pounding, a heavy dread settling in my stomach. My life was ordinary. I woke up, grabbed my coffee, and sat down in my favorite chair every morning. But what I uncovered that day shattered my routine. It was a tap, tap, tap from the attic. A sound I had heard before, but it had never frightened me like it did now. It was different, charged with something sinister. The sun had already disappeared, leaving only shadows behind. The air turned cold, wrapping around me like a shroud. I could almost smell the dampness of the walls, the mustiness creeping into my lungs. As I listened, the tapping turned to scratching, like nails against wood. My heartbeat quickened. Each noise echoed like an ominous metronome, counting down to something dreadful. That I glanced at the family photos lining the wall, smiling faces that suddenly felt alien. Were those smiles real? Did they know? I strained to hear, tried to drown out my racing thoughts. I whispered to myself, it's nothing. Just my imagination. But deep down, something whispered back. It wasn't my imagination. That I pushed the door to the attic open. It creaked ominously, the sound making me flinch. The darkness yawned before me, ready to swallow me whole. A gust of wind swirled past, sending chills down my spine. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. My heart thundered, the silence stretching out like a taut string ready to snap. That I reached for the light switch. But it didn't turn on. Darkness enveloped me. The air felt charged, electric. I was not alone. Suddenly, the scratching turned into frantic clawing. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back. What was up there? I wouldn't find out. My body screamed to run, but my feet felt glued to the spot. Then I saw it. A silhouette, a figure in the shadows. No face, just an outline with twisted edges. My breath hitched. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen in place. A whisper echoed from the dark, chilling my very core. Help! And then the door slammed shut behind me. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. The darkness pressed against me, thick and suffocating. I could only hear my own ragged breathing, shallow and frantic. The silhouette shifted slightly, as if testing the connection between us, gauging my fear. A bitter cold enveloped me, and the air seemed to vibrate with an unseen force, thrumming against my skin. Help! The whisper again, barely audible yet insistent. It was drenched in desperation, laced with an unrecognizable terror that seeped into my bones. Instinct screamed at me to move, but I felt rooted to the ground, unwilling to break the fragile thread of connection with the presence in front of me. Summoning every ounce of courage, I forced my voice out, though it trembled. What do you want? The question hung between us like a lifeline, but it was met only with silence. I strained my eyes, trying to discern the figure beyond the veil of darkness. Its silhouette was unnaturally elongated, the edges like wisps of smoke, flickering and distorting as if caught in the grip of an unseen gale. Suddenly, the scratching erupted again, louder this time, a cacophony of claws clawing at something far beyond the walls. It echoed in relentless rhythm, drowning out my thoughts. Each stroke resonated within me, setting my nerves ablaze. Then, without warning, a low growl emanated from the figure. It was a sound so hollow, it twisted my stomach. The air thickened, and I felt something brush against my cheek, a freezing caress that sent my body into a panic. I stumbled back, colliding with the wall, gasping, searching for the door. It had to be there, inches away, but the darkness warped everything, distorting space and time. Help! The voice was louder now, more frenzied, almost tangible, wrapping around me like a vice. I clenched my fists, scanning the gloom for an escape. Something glinted momentarily in the abyss, a sliver of light just beyond the figure. It called to me, like a lighthouse in a storm, promising safety if I could only reach it. Get away from me. I shouted, knowing it could jeopardize everything, but the words surged from me like a tide, determined to break the stranglehold of fear. The silhouette recoiled abruptly, as if stung, retreating into a deeper shadow. The growl morphed into a shriek of anguish, and for a split second, I could see a glimpse of eyes, hollow and filled with an ancient sorrow. That I turned, adrenaline flooding my system. I charged toward the dim light, hoping against hope that it led to freedom. But the moment my foot met the floor, a hand shot out from the void, curling around my ankle with an icy grip, and I fell, face first into the dark. I felt the pulse of horror resonate like a final heartbeat, and panic took root. Frantically, I clawed at the ground, ripping myself free, but the whisper morphed into a cacophony of voices, each pleading, each crying out for the same help I had denied. That I scrambled for the door, my fingertips brushing against the cool metal of the knob. But just as I grasped it, the door swung inward, a force overcoming the lock, and the figure loomed before me, no more tangible, its features coalescing into a grotesque visage that seemed to twist like a reflection in a fractured mirror. Hollow eyes danced with malice, and a smile stretched too widely across its face, revealing a mouth filled with jagged teeth. Help! It hissed again, but this time the word wasn't a plea, it was an invitation, a cruel mockery that promised unspeakable torment. And at that moment, I comprehended the truth. I was not its savior but its next victim. With one last burst of strength, I yanked the door open, but as I did, the shadows surged forth like a ravenous tide, engulfing me completely. I was thrown back into that suffocating blackness, feeling fingers grasp at my skin, my mind screaming against the waves of despair crashing over me. As the darkness closed in, reality splintered and shivered. I felt the overwhelming urge to succumb, to let the darkness swallow me whole, and just as everything around me began to fade, I saw something, a reflection in the abyss, something that was both me and not me, looming beyond the veil. With my last shred of consciousness, I realized it wasn't just the figure that haunted my attic. It was waiting for me to join the chorus of the damned, merging into the torment of the forgotten. The last thing I heard before I was dragged down into a void darker than the shadows was an echo of my own voice joining the chorus, and then, silence. I woke, or at least I thought I did, in an airless space that smelled of mildew and decay. My limbs felt heavy, weighed down by an unseen force. Panic gnawed at my insides as vague memories of the void flooded back to me, but there was no time to dwell on them. I was still caught in a realm where time twisted and reality warped. Cold fingers of fear curled around my throat, and I sat up abruptly, gasping. I couldn't tell where I was. The surroundings were shrouded in a relentless darkness, the kind that seemed to drape itself over every surface like a shroud. The only sound was my heartbeat pounding in my ears, merging with distant, haunting wails that echoed off unseen walls. As I looked around, a flicker of light caught my eye, almost imperceptible yet definite. Compelled by a gnawing curiosity, I pushed myself up, peering toward the faint illumination. It pulsed like a heartbeat, flickering too quickly to discern if it belonged to this world or another. Something deep within me urged caution, warning of what lay beyond that light. I hesitated, afraid of what might await me, but despair had unfurled its wings around me, squeezing my chest tight, and I stumbled forward. The oppressive darkness seemed to draw closer, a living entity pulsating with malice. I clutched my arms around myself, heart racing, as I neared the source of the glow. With each step, the wails morphed into distinct voices, and I could feel their sentiments brush against my very soul. Dread, sorrow, rage, their emotions mingling in an unholy symphony of despair. As I approached, the light grew fiercer, illuminating a small, circular room with cracked stone walls that glistened like wet skin. At its center lay a single, tarnished mirror resting against the ground. The glow radiated from it, swirling in hues of silver and blue, casting ethereal reflections that filled the room with a haunting beauty that contrasted sharply with the dread pulsating in my chest. I knelt beside it, and at that moment, I caught my first glimpses of the horrors that lay within its depths. The mirror was far more than a reflective surface, it appeared to be alive, twisting and churning as if it were a portal to another realm. Inside, shadows flitted back and forth, faces contorted in screams and cries for freedom, their eyes wide with terror. My breath caught in my throat, and I could almost hear their voices, a cacophony of lamentation. The mirror pulled at me, enticing and entrapping. I reached out, fingertips brushing against the cool surface. An electric jolt traveled up my arm, sending a shiver down my spine. The moment I connected, the faces in the mirror shifted, their gazes locking onto mine, pleading for salvation. No! I gasped, staggering back as a surge of energy erupted from the mirror, slicing through the room like lightning. It roared as it erupted forth, shattering the stillness. Shadows rose like smoke, swirling around me, enveloping me in a cacophony of despair. The whispers crescendoed, a symphony of voices that clawed at my sanity, urging me to join them. Before I could process the chaos, something gripped my Shudera hand, cold and unyielding. I turned, but the space behind me was hollow, consumed by darkness. There was nobody there except the dreadful realization of what I'd done off what I had invited into this realm by touching the mirror. The light flickered violently, and the figures within grew frantic. Their mouths opened wide, stretching into silent screams of warning, yet the echoes of their horror only incited my own descent into terror. Suddenly, a shadow stepped from the depths, forming itself into a figure with grotesque contours, a face obscured but undeniably watching me. The dread surged as I realized the figure was not trapped in the mirror, it had been waiting for me to unleash it. Panic coursed through my veins like ice, and I stumbled back, but the darkness surged forward, inexorably drawn to my fear. It wrapped around me, constricting my breath, pulling me into a whirlpool of terror where I could feel the energy of the restless souls. Flooding as I fought against its pull, chanting the names of the lost, desperate for freedom, I felt the sinister presence leaning closer, sending an icy breath against the back of my neck. The whispers erupted into a frantic frenzy, drowning out all coherent thought as I realized the truth. The real horror was outside the mirror, and it was coming for me. With a scream that echoed off the walls, I threw myself toward the mirror, fueled by instinct alone in a blind attempt to escape the impending darkness. Just as I made contact, the reality of my actions slammed into me like a sentient brick wall, and then all went black again, leaving only the rushing sound of my heartbeat in my ears. The last thing I felt was the cold touch of many hands pulling me in, dragging me to a realm where the echoes of despair transformed into a chilling silence that promised none would escape. But just before everything dissolved, a single thought pierced through the gloom: my reflection was no longer just mine. I had become one of them. I awoke suddenly, breathless, as if emerging from beneath a freezing tide. The light was blaring, so intense that it seared my retinas. Confused, I blinked furiously, struggling to piece together the shards of my shattered memory. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, writhing like worms in a wound. I could feel them lurking just beyond the periphery, waiting and watching. That I was no longer in the circular room. Instead, I found myself in a long, narrow corridor, its walls pulsating faintly with an eerie green luminescence. The air was thick, tainted with the scent of decay and something far worse, an acrid familiarity that made bile rise in my throat. The floor beneath me was slick, sticky, as if something unnameable had been spilled in quantities too great to conceal. With every step I took, my foot came away with a nauseating squelch that I pushed forward, heart racing, the sensation of being watched palpable. The corridor stretched endlessly ahead, disappearing into a fog that swirled with unnatural energy. It whispered secrets not meant for mortal ears, a low hum vibrating in my bones. I swallowed hard, forcing my leaden limbs to continue, desperate for anything familiar. Then came the sound, a slow, distinct dragging, like fingers trailing against glass. The hairs on the back of my neck bristled as I turned, the breath hitching in my throat. A shadow slouched against the wall, morphing and expanding with each heartbeat. My instincts screamed at me to flee, but curiosity lured me closer like a moth to a flame that I could see now. It was a figure hunched low, its body distorted in a grotesquely beautiful dance of light and dark. It was shimmering yet shadowed, flickering in and out of reality. The closer I drew, the more clarity emerged a face once familiar, twisted and grotesque. It was my own reflection, somehow deformed and alive, yet utterly devoid of life. The eyes stared back with hollowed sockets, their gaze both accusatory and pleading, a dark mirror of what I had become. No. I gasped, stumbling back, but it followed, that empty expression morphing into a grotesque smile. I recoiled again and turned to run, but the corridor had changed, the landscape shifted, bending and twisting, making my escape futile. The dragging sound became a chorus of rasping breaths that echoed through the narrowing walls, inching closer with each heartbeat that I sprinted, the world around me dissolving into a kaleidoscope of dark and terror. The walls grew closer, and the shadows reached out, tendrils of cold wrapping around my wrists, pulling me back toward the emptiness. My heart thundered, my mind racing with thoughts of that mirror of the evil I had introduced to my existence. As I rounded a corner, the corridor opened abruptly into a vast chamber, its ceiling veiled in swirling mist. In the center lay an altar, the stone twisted and gnarled as if it had grown from the earth itself. Agonized faces marred its surface, reminiscent of those trapped within the mirror, their features frozen in silent screams. I recognized some friends, family, people I had known in life. The light flickered above them, bathing the altar in an otherworldly glow that sent a shiver of dread racing through me. I staggered toward it, caught between horror and attraction. But as I approached, the faces began to writhe and reach up, as if trying to claw their way free. The room trembled with their collective cries, and in an anguished plea, I could almost hear my own name echoed back at me. A slick warmth seeped from the altar, pooling around my feet, and I realized with horror that it was blood fresh and glistening. No, no, no. I shrieked, backing away, but the shadows surged from all directions, enclosing me with crushing weight. The faces twisted in anguish, pleading with me silently to join them. A part of me was drawn, beckoned to accept the inevitable horror, but instinct kicked in. I turned and ran, the altar receding into the abyss behind me. As I fled, frantically searching for an exit, the shadows seemed to conspire, shifting and writhing, merging into one distorted mass that blocked every path. My breath came in gasps, despair clawing at my throat. Just as I thought the darkness would swallow me whole, a single door appeared at the far end of the chamber, bathed in a glow that felt both inviting and ominous. I lunged toward it, desperation fueling my every move. Just as I reached for the handle, a chilling laugh erupted from the shadows, reverberating like the echo of a funeral bell, accompanied by the sounds of 1,000 wails. I hesitated, a primal sense of foreboding washing over me. The door swung open, revealing a blinding light that blinded me momentarily. But then I felt a pull of force gripping my heart, as though the mirror desired me back. An overwhelming sensation of inevitability washed over me, and in that split-second moment, as I teetered on the brink of safety and the insatiable darkness behind me, I knew I had to make a choice, but that choice would shatter what little remained of my very being. And as I stepped through, the laughter grew louder, mingling with the whispers of the damned, ringing in my ears. I was not alone anymore, and all I could think was how far I had fallen, and who might be waiting for me on the other side. Light enveloped me like a shroud, its warmth a deceitful contradiction to the icy tendrils still wrapped around my heart. I expected salvation, relief from the horrors that had pursued me through the oppressive darkness. But as my eyes adjusted to the brightness, an unsettling reality unfurled before me. I stood on a precipice, an expanse of shifting sand that rolled away into an endless abyss. The ground beneath was tremulous, emitting a low, throbbing hum that resonated in my bones. It felt alive, breathing in sync with the darkness from which I had escaped. The glaring light emanated not from the sun but from countless flickering orbs, drifting slowly like will-o'-the-wisps, a sinister illumination against the void. Panic surged anew. I was drawn to the gleaming orbs, their dance beckoning me closer. But with every step I took, the sands shifted treacherously beneath me, threatening to pull me into the yawning chasm at any moment. I stopped, heart racing, searching for anything familiar to grasp onto. Yet the only thing that met my gaze was a horizon that darkened progressively, its depths spinning with the shadows I had left behind. Taking a steadying breath, I scanned the horizon for signs of life. My throat constricted at the sight. Dark figures emerged from the sands like nightmares crawling from the fringes of consciousness. They were wraith-like, shrouded in a mist that obscured their faces, their limbs elongated and twisted, moving with a deliberate slowness that set my teeth on edge. I could see their mouths form the words of an unearthly chant, a discordant harmony that pulled at my very soul. "Stay with us, join the dance," they whispered, as if I were a mere puppet in this dreadful theater. Something shifted deep within me, a hunger awakening that I didn't recognize. My own reflection, still grotesque and pleading, floated on the edge of my mind. The desire to join them, to slip away from my reality and become part of this hauntingly beautiful nightmare, drew me like a moth to an unseen flame. "No!" I shouted into the void. The sound twisted into the air, echoing back, as if the darkness laughed at my resistance. But my defiance remained. I turned and stumbled back the way I came, flecks of despair mixing with the grit of sand beneath my feet. "Turn back." Came a voice, sharp and piercing, slicing through the twilight air. It was a wretched sound, reminiscent of cracking glass. I froze as the voice echoed off the veil of shadows, reverberating through the empty space, leaving me reeling. "Turn back while you still can." It was the face from the mirror, contorted and distorted, a cruel mockery of the one I had once known. I could see it now clearer than before. It was not just a reflection but a fragment, one of many fragments waiting to reclaim me. The sand trembled beneath my feet, threatening to envelop me in its depths. I had to move. With every nerve ending alight with terror, I ran past the shadows clinging to the edge of perception, past the chanting wraiths who twisted and beckoned with their elongated fingers. Their whispers escalated, rising like a crescendo, wrapping around me in a suffocating embrace. Suddenly, the ground beneath me ceased its movement, solidifying into a coarse stone floor drenched in moonlight. I was transported again, the pulsing darkness subsiding into an unfamiliar realm. Walls adorned with faintly glowing symbols encased me, breathing with an energy both enticing and forbidding that a chill swept through the chamber, making the hairs stand up on my arms. I stumbled forward, each step echoing an unbearable weight of inevitability. The symbols began to swirl in a chaotic frenzy, forming sentences that cascaded around me. "Welcome, you are the chosen, the mirror yearns for you." The air shifted, thickening, and I quaked as the shadows from the previous world folded back into the corners, but now, they were different. Some bore the features of people I had loved, twisted horrors laden with remorse. Their eyes pleaded with me, a thousand voices screaming in silence, yearning for liberation from their torment. "Join us," they whispered. You cannot escape the truth." That I stepped back, my mind clouded with panic as I turned to find refuge, but it was no use. The symbols circled round me, vivid and alive, as the walls began to close in. I could feel the mirage of escape linked to the heart of the darkness calling to me. All my instincts screamed for flight, but my limbs were heavy, anchored by the memory of my own reflection. That I turned around to confront the encroaching shadows, the grotesque faces merging into this nightmarish tapestry. And at that moment, I knew if I couldn't defeat the darkness within, it would consume me wholly. The ground shuddered violently, a fissure splitting the earth beneath me. I slipped, tumbling towards the yawning gulf of the abyss, arms flailing. Just before I plunged into the unknown, a cold hand caught my wrist, pulling me up, something out of the void, an unseen force that sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Are you ready to become whole again?" It whispered against the backdrop of chaos, a voice dripping with malice and seduction, and with the shadows closing in around me like a noose, I felt my resolve falter, the line between who I was and what I could become blurring with each heartbeat. Then, as the darkness drummed against my heart, they pulled me in, and I understood far too late that the true horror lay not in vanquishing my fears, but in embracing them. The darkness unraveled around me, tendrils of night weaving through my very essence. It was a feeling both sickening and exhilarating. I was caught in a web of forsaken choices and buried memories, urged to confront the shadows that shaped me. I glimpsed faces in the void, elongated figures, haunting whispers that beckoned me forward. They twisted into familiar forms, memories of my past lives melting into an amalgamation of fear and longing. "Remember us? We were once whole together." A voice, soft and laced with desperation, emerged from the depths. It was my brother, who had long since drowned in his own darkness, his presence like a phantom that sent a chill down my spine. "Join us, sister. Join the dance. As the echoes of their chanting surrounded me, I felt the weight of their pain settle on my shoulders, every wail a reminder of the burdens I had tried to discard. The spectral hand that held my wrist tightened, a grotesque blend of contention and familiarity. The voice called again, seductive and powerful, embrace what you fear, or succumb to the void. That I glanced into that metafictional abyss, a swirling mass of desires and regrets that promised both torment and freedom. Each flickering orb around me pulsed with the heartbeats of souls long lost, their sounds forming a grim chorus of endless longing. Losing myself in their chant, I felt an unholy yearning rise, a siren song that drowned out the last vestiges of my will. No! I gasped, tearing my gaze away from the flickering lights. Realizing if I succumbed, I would lose the last remnants of my identity. In that moment of defiance, strength surged within me, pushing back against the hands of the necromantic void. With a desperate jerk, I wrenched myself free from my brother's grasp and stumbled backward, crashing down against the hard ground. I landed amidst swirling shadows that clawed at my legs like the lost souls of the damned. I could sense their anger, their disappointment, their desperation echoed in the walls that writhed like a restless sea. The symbols that adorned the walls glowed brighter, pulsing like living eyes, and I scrambled to my feet, heart racing. Even amidst chaos, a flame of determination sparked within me. I had to escape this wretched place, this liminal space where the fragility of life melted into shades of despair. But the shadows were relentless. They surged toward me, forming a wall of darkness that encircled me. The whispers grew louder, drowning my thoughts. Return to us, nothing awaits you beyond the veil. Only darkness follows in your wake. I pressed my forehead against the cold stone, mind racing, fighting against the despair threatening to envelop me. The fissure in the ground trembled ominously, and I watched as it expanded, unveiling the yawning mouth of an abyss painted in the deepest pitch. It had become an entrance to everything I had feared. The haunted echoes of my past, lurking beneath its surface, were hungry for the warmth of new flesh. Suddenly, a light flared from within the abyss, radiating a blinding glow that outlined forms dancing just beyond the barrier of darkness. Faces lined with anguish and ecstasy twisted toward me, beckoning, yearning for communion. I felt the pull, the magnetic force that wanted nothing more than to consume me, to weave me into their tapestry of shared torment. Become one of us. Your pain is our pain, together we will transcend. They cried in unison, their voices now a harmonious cacophony that resonated deep within my core. That I stuttered backward, my breath hitching in my throat. The reality of the choice before me crashed over like a tidal wave. To fall, or to fight. To embrace the darkness or claw back to whatever semblance of light remained. In that tight moment, the ground beneath me shifted again, sending a shockwave through my body, blurring the line between life and the embrace of shadow. I fought to stabilize myself, eyes darting for an escape. The wraith-like figures converged, their forms lengthening grotesquely, arms stretching as if to shatter the fragile perimeter that had held them back. And as the noose of darkness drew tighter around me, a shriek echoed from the depths of the abyss, a voice familiar yet drenched in agony. Help me, I am lost. My heart pounded in my chest, recognition dawning like the cruel spike of a thunderbolt. I knew that anguished cry that was my voice twisted into a lament. The pain in it was real. It was me, yet separate, trapped among those who had surrendered long ago, circling the drain of despair. As I teetered on the precipice of doom, grappling with my own reflection cast amidst the shadows, the ground gave way completely. I screamed, plummeting into the cold maw of darkness, where echoes of the fractured truths waited. The last thing I heard was the clamor of countless souls, an orchestra of despair and longing colliding in a symphony that signaled my unwilling fall into the very heart of the nightmare. Then silence. The silence was a suffocating blanket, wrapping around me like a wet shroud. I floated in an endless abyss, no sense of direction or depth, just an oppressive void that threatened to swallow me whole. My heart thundered in my chest, yet no sound echoed back. It was as if sound had died in this liminality, leaving me alone in a graveyard of echoes. That I was unanchored, drifting, when a faint glow emerged in the distant, an ethereal shimmer that flickered like a candle fighting against the wind. Driven by instinct, I pushed forward, the darkness swirling around me as if angry at my defiance. The light became a beacon, illuminating grotesque shapes twisting and contorting in the periphery of my vision. I did my best to ignore them, as though they wanted to lure me into their wretched embrace. As I drew closer, the light sharpened, revealing a clearing suspended in the realm of night with shadows writhing restlessly along its borders. This was not salvation but a cruel reflection of my deepest fears. Here stood figures I recognized, yet their faces morphed into grotesque parodies of the people I loved. My brother, his mouth twisted in a rictus grin, his hollow eyes alight with malice. My parents, forever frozen in tormented expressions. They drifted like wraiths on the edges, whispering taunts that sliced through the thick air, but their words were indistinguishable, drowned beneath the weight of despair hanging in that twilight. Come to dine with the forsaken, a voice crooned, but it belonged to none amongst the figures. It wrapped around me, a sweet poison that coiled tightly around my heart. I clenched my fists, fighting against the urge to succumb, to let go. I could feel the haunting breath of the abyss swarming around me, pulling me closer, when suddenly, I was jerked back into reality as the visions exploded into a vivid tableau, a memory reborn that I found myself standing in an attic, the air thick with dust and decay. The faintest light spilled from a crack in the wall, illuminating shards of broken glass and the hulking silhouette of an old trunk. Strange, ugly dolls stared with lifeless button eyes from a decrepit shelf, their mouths forever sealed, yet I could almost hear their silent screams pleading for liberation. Then the air chilled considerably, a cruel shift in temperature that made every hair on my body stand on end. The trunk creaked open with an eerie groan, as if summoned by some unseen force. A wave of nausea washed over me, for the dark anticipation whispered to me just seconds before the grotesquerie unfolded. From within the trunk, shadows writhed and coiled, gaining form in a sickly fashion. It unfurled like a predator stalking its prey, snaking its way out into the dim light. I could barely breathe, limbs frozen with fear at the pulsing mass that revealed the skeletal remains of those who had come before me, lost souls trawling for company in their eternal purgatory. But worse than the sight was the feeling, the horrific knowledge that they recognized me, that they had been waiting for me. Their hollow eye sockets peered through the gloom, locked onto my frantic gaze. Join us, they hissed, their breath hot and fetid against my skin. Join the dance of forgotten dreams. That I staggered back, my heart racing, though every cell in my body urged me to fight against the relentless rise of impending doom. The attic began to shudder, the walls vibrated with the relentless pulse of spectral energy, creating a monstrous symphony of despair. I could almost see the memories swirling around me, trapped like moths in a flame, blinding me with their incandescent fear. In that instant of duel against despair, the attic warped and twisted as darkness broke through the foundations, clawing up from the depths of the very earth. The grinning faces of the damned emerged once more, closing in a grotesque congregation that had awakened from their slumber. No, I shouted, choking on the thickness of fear that strangled my resolve. Then, the brilliant light flickered one final time. It exploded into a flurry of sparkles that rained on my skin, awakening my senses, reminding me of the world that lay beyond the rift. But before I could gather my strength to escape the suffocating hands closing around me, the dolls on the shelves began to shift, their stitched mouths slowly peeling open. Never leave, they crooned in unison, their voices a haunting melody invoking the terrors that danced on the fringe of my consciousness. As the shrill echoes consumed my thoughts, I felt the remnants of my fractured soul being pulled downward, deeper into the onyx maw of despair. With every ounce of will, I fought back. The figures clawed at my consciousness, the tangled threads of forgotten memories pulling me tighter into their dark waltz, and then it happened. I was yanked violently away from the threshold of oblivion, back into the cavernous heart of darkness, a strange, distorted version of my home. As I looked into the familiar surroundings, I was struck by a shocking realization. Each room held a ghost of who I once was, whispers drifting through the wallpaper, echoes of my own tortured screams reverberating in the hallways. The final manifestations came creeping into view, eyes glinting with an insatiable hunger, mouths stretching into serpentine shapes that defied their human forms. You will never be free, they mocked, their tortured cries ringing in my ears as I braced myself for the inevitable. And as the walls of my former sanctuary closed in, the last of my hope thrummed like a fragile thread until it snapped, plunging me back into the very abyss I fought so desperately to escape. The grotesque carousel of horrors began anew, and in that moment, I understood, the dance had only just begun. then I felt an icy finger tracing the length of my spine, sweeping under my skin, igniting a terror that expanded into a scream lodged in my throat. I turned, ready to confront what was behind me, only to be faced with an empty corridor devoid of light but shadowed with dark promise. They were waiting, and as they pounced, the last flicker of light was extinguished. The darkness closed in around me like a smothering blanket, enveloping me in its suffocating grasp. I stumbled forward in the blackness, each footfall swallowed by a silence that roared in my ears. The air felt thick, ripe with bitterness, and I could almost taste the memories of past terror clinging to every breath that I pushed onward, driven by a primal instinct, the desperate need to escape this hellish spiral that threatened to consume me. Yet, with every determined step I took, the environment twisted around me, the very fabric of reality ripping at the seams. I felt the floor beneath me shift, become sticky with an unnatural substance, as if the ground groaned in grotesque response to my presence. Suddenly, a flicker of light burst forth again, sparking to life in front of me. This one seemed different, sickly and pulsating, an infectious glow that beckoned me closer. With each stride, I could feel it merge with my skin, a vile warmth that trickled through my veins. My heartbeat synced with its throb, drowning out the remnants of self-preservation that shrieked inside my head. As I neared the source, a horrific sight met my eyes. Figures stood in twisted rows, each one a grotesque mirage of distorted humanity. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, as if they'd been dipped in the essence of fear itself. They oscillated in place like marionettes caught in an unseen puppet master's grip, their mouths gaping wide with anguish, yet no sound escaped their throats. Doomed, they whispered, a cacophony of despair that reverberated within the hollow chasms of my mind. "You are one of us now." I recoiled, tears burning in my eyes, the truth resonating painfully within me. I was being pulled into this fractured communion, a collective of souls trapped in a tangential existence between reality and nightmare. But the tremor of my fear ignited a fire beneath my skin. These weren't mere shadowy figures. They were remnants of my past, fragments of the lives I had shattered without realizing it. Each face morphed into someone I had hurt, someone I had abandoned, my childhood friend with a broken smile, a pet I had neglected, a stranger's plea I had ignored. Their eyes glimmered like shards of glass reflecting my inadequacies, each one a harsh mirror reflecting the darkness that festered within me. "No!" I screamed, but the word clawed its way back into my throat, swallowed by the specters now advancing, stretching their hands toward me, their decaying fingers twisting into grotesque shapes. They reached out as if demanding my submission, pulling me into their nocturnal embrace. My skin crawled with the sensation of their touch as the ground trembled beneath us. "Join the symphony," they hummed, the words like razor blades through my heart. I fought against the ebb of despair but was met with an overwhelming tide that crashed against my will. Each face became an anchor, chaining me to this living nightmare that fed off my fear. Terror gripped my soul, and through the chaos, I saw the cottage from my childhood, a memory flashing like a dying ember. I had long since abandoned it, letting weeds grow wild where laughter once thrived. Destruction cloaked that place, but it tugged at me like a moth drawn to the flamy last hope buried beneath the rubble. "Find her," a voice echoed. It was soft, a soothing whisper entwined in the fury of the madhouse around me. It wasn't a taunt, it felt like a promise of truth buried deep within the ruins. The realization struck me with the force of a thunderclap. I needed to confront what lay beneath the rubble of my past. As the souls lunged at me, their hands grasping, I broke free from their grasp, propelled by the need to unearth my own burden. I turned, my resolve igniting a flicker of unfamiliar courage. I sprinted through the darkness until the pulses alongside me faded into temporary shadows. The cottage was close now, the air heavier than ever, stained with sterile memories that begged to be reawakened. I burst inside, heart rattling like a caged beast fighting for freedom. Each step deeper into the familiar decay set my senses ablaze, the scent of mildew and despair wrapping around me like a shroud that I searched frantically, clawing at the memories buried in the corners. In the dim light, something shimmered, a journal, worn and tattered, resting atop a collapsed table. As I reached for it, a chilling wind swept through the space, slamming the door shut behind me. I spun around to find the ghostly figures of the damned forming an impenetrable barrier, their eyes glittering cold and hollow. "Open it," they chorused, and a sudden dread gripped my heart. I hesitated, a part of me screaming to resist, yet another part curious and desperate urged me on. With trembling hands, I pried the journal open, and the pages fell away like dry autumn leaves. Ink blotted with unrecognizable symbols bled through the fibers, drawing forth images from my mind, visions I had buried, truths I had fled from. But before I could make sense of the chaos swirling in front of me, the wall shifted, twisting and expanding like a gaping mouth readying to devour me. Desperate cries echoed against the walls, a symphony of sorrow echoing my own shattered heart. The grasping hands surged forward, their intention sinister and sharp, and I was swept back into the depths of existence, falling into a void of nothingness. Just before I lost the last remnants of consciousness, the journal whispered, "Every nightmare has its end," and then, silence, but the silence was deceiving, for in the darkness, a new voice reached out, a haunting echo that felt profoundly familiar, and deep within me, fear transformed into an insatiable curiosity. "You're not done yet." I felt the floor beneath me give way, shadows swirling as I dropped into the abyss below, unaware of what awaited. As I plunged into the suffocating dark, I braced myself for the impact of the unknown. Instead of landing hard against something solid, I was enveloped by a viscous mist that wrapped around me like a suffocating cocoon. The sensation was cold and clammy, sapping my strength and blurring my thoughts. I couldn't discern up from down or the extent of the space surrounding me. The journal's ominous words echoed in the recesses of my mind, a promise of truths yet uncovered. With labored breaths, I twisted and turned, struggling against the claustrophobic embrace of the thick fog, until it began to disperse. Slowly, the silhouettes of morbid shapes came into view, standing eerily still like shadows frozen in a macabre tableau. I was in a cavernous room, illuminated faintly by dying embers that crackled in a distant pit, an underground lair crawling beneath the cottage, hidden from the world above. The shapes before me began to twitch. As the wispy halos of light flickered and danced, I braced myself for the horrors they would unveil. They were not the disfigured souls from before, but hollow-eyed figures clad in ragged clothing, their features masked by shadow. Slowly, one of them stepped closer, the face flickering into existence like a candle's wick finding flame, and recognition slammed into my chest like a hammer. "Lucy." It was my sister, her voice eerily distorted, hollow, and saturated in despair. The child I had forgotten, buried beneath years of guilt. I staggered backward, my pulse spiking in a whirlwind of panic and disbelief. "What happened to you?" Her mouth twisted into a grotesque imitation of a smile, revealing rows of sharpened teeth that glinted from the flickering light. "You left me," she hissed. "You left us all." Around her, the other figures began to shift, the shadows enveloping them whispering secrets I couldn't understand. The air grew dense, an oppressive weight settling upon my chest, while Lucy's eyes, glittering with torment, bore into my soul. "You have to listen. It's not over. No." I cried, the denial punctuating my voice, a desperate refusal echoing off the cavern walls. But as I turned to flee, more figures emerged from the darkness, each bearing the familiar faces of those I had lost, faces twisted by anguish and betrayal. In this realm of shadows, they hovered like smoke, their eyes wide with unfulfilled desires and rage. "You think you can escape?" They chorused with mocking laughter, a sound made ghastly by the cacophony of their collective pain. "You must atone." That I stumbled backward, my heart racing as I desperately scanned the cavern, searching for an escape from this maddening circle of lost souls. Then, I noticed rusted chains linking the figures to the ground, their life force tethered to this dismal existence. The chains rattled ominously, their echoes resonating through the chamber, an unyielding reminder that they were bound by the weight of my choices. In a raw burst of desperation, I shouted, "What do you want from me?" The words shot through the air with a fierce urgency, but the reply came as a collective murmur of grief. To remember, one of them chanted, its voice laden with sorrow. The walls of the cavern shook, reverberating with the memories I had tried so hard to forget. Images surged violently through my mind, unbidden, moments of laughter, love, and unheeded cries for help that disintegrated into the ether after they fell from my lips. The room began to pulse, distortions rippling through the shadows, and the cave walls morphed into a swirling tapestry of my Lithia life riddled with neglect and ghosts of those I abandoned in my pursuit of escape. Fear shot through me like ice, realizing the truth. I was indeed the architect of their suffering, the catalyst for this eternal nightmare. No. I screamed again, the sound mingling with the howls of the damned. But it only fueled their fury, and the figures surged closer, their chains rattling wildly as if demanding my sacrifice for their freedom. In the midst of their wretched communion, one form separated itself from the rest, breaking the chain that bound it. It drew toward me, its face morphing into something both familiar and horrific. It was me exactly as I had been on the night everything had unraveled, splattered in darkness and soaked in reckless abandon. "Face what you thought you buried," the shadowy version of myself whispered, and with every word, it slashed through the haze of denial that kept my heart bound and heavy. I felt the weight of every unuttered regret flooding into my core, merging with the cries of the anguish-stricken around me. In that moment, a fissure of light broke through the darkness, revealing a doorway shimmering with an ethereal glow, the exit from this torment. But I knew it would come at a cost. My other self stepped closer, an invitation marred with the promise of pain, yet threaded with an undeniable pull, a choice woven into the fabric of my very existence. "Choose," it urged, the echo of a million lost voices whispering secrets of my dark past. "Choose to remember or be consumed by the void." As I hesitated, the room erupted into a cacophony of screams, terror echoing in every direction, drowning out everything else. The walls quaked, the chains rattled fiercely, and all at once, the air thickened with the scent of decay and despair. With a final look at my sister's tormented visage, a flicker of hope ignited. I gathered every ounce of courage and lunged toward the light just as the shadows lunged at me, determined to pull me back into eternal darkness. And in that last heartbeat, as I teetered on the precipice, the last thing I heard was a deafening roar of anguish, a chorus of souls crying out for resolution, for the truth that I was still too afraid to confront. Then, the light engulfed me, and everything went dark once more. The darkness pulled me through an endless vacuum, an unsettling silence echoing round and round in my mind. I felt the familiar weight of dread press against my chest, an unyielding pressure that, for what seemed like an eternity, never faltered. In that void, I feared I would linger forever, teetering between life and the echoes of the damned. Then, slowly, fragmented memories began to coalesce around me. At first, they were mere shadows, faint silhouettes scraping against the surface of my consciousness, fleeting reminders of laughter, warmth, and familial love intermingled with an icy chill of despair. But, as I focused, the scenes sharpened, and abruptly, I found myself standing at the epicenter of my childhood home, the very place I had tried so desperately to forget. The air was stale, carrying with it the weight of lost souls who once tread these floors. A warm breeze drifted through a cracked window, rousing memories that lay dormant in cobwebbed corners. I could feel it, something was off. The walls were still breathing. The tiles squished beneath my feet like slush, and the scent of despair wrapped around me, thick and unyielding. I stepped into the living room, where dust motes danced lazily in the sunlight that crept through broken blinds. I could see the old family portrait hung crookedly on the wall, faces that smiled back at me with a hollow appreciation, a painful reminder of shattered innocence. As I approached it, it felt as though each face turned their gaze toward me, not with reproach but with a grim understanding of what had transpired. "Help," I murmured, not even knowing who I was addressing. Was it my family, long lost to the recesses of my mind? Was it the haunting entities that once roamed this space? Or was I whispering to the pieces of myself still trapped in shadows? A chill raced down my spine at that realization. Without warning, the walls began to vibrate, and as I turned, the air thickened, the familiar weight of despair rotating back to consume me. For a fleeting moment, I thought I might see the sun once more, but the shadows surged around me, wrapping their tendrils around my limbs, constricting tighter than I'd ever imagined. That which I thought I had escaped pulsed through the walls, and I felt the pulse resonate within my ear, an ominous reminder that I was still tethered, still caught in this web. "Join us," a voice, soft yet commanding, broke through my panic. It was that same voice I had run from for so long, the specter of my brother, twisted and dark, but with recognizable undertones. "Help us, help yourself." The figures began to swirl around me, those I thought I had severed ties with long ago lost friends, memories distorted by time, and those who had long since faded from my life. They moved in unison, a grotesque ballet of desperation, arms stretching toward me. Their eyes begged for something that pulsed inside me, something familiar, yet I was paralyzed with fear. I turned to run, but the doorway behind me was no longer there. "Embrace the darkness," they chanted. "You cannot elude your own reflection." The walls collapsed around me, revealing a gaping maw, the very mouth of the entity I had unwittingly unleashed all along. I staggered back as the room shifted yet again, a swirling vortex drawing all life into its depths. In that moment, clarity struck. This was not just a refuge for the lost, it was a prison built upon my neglect, my shame, and choices made in fear. I was caught in the very fabric of my own haunting, an endless cycle of avoidance and consequence. "Face it," my brother's voice morphed into something unrecognizable, commanding me to confront the truth of my existence. I clenched my fists, gathering the courage that had eluded me for so long. The shadows lunged forward, but instead of fear, I felt something else rise within me, defiance. I knew my only choice was to embrace the darkness I had long buried, to take hold of what I had neglected for so long. Gripping my memories like a lifeline, I turned to meet them head-on. "That I will remember," I shouted, my voice rising above the chaos. The room shrieked and shuddered, the walls peeling apart, revealing layers of my life that had haunted me. A rush of vivid memories poured through, the laughter shared, the moments regretfully squandered, and the cries I had repressed. But as a blinding wave of light surged from within me, I understood, it wasn't enough to simply face them. I had to forgive what I had lost, what I had failed, and ultimately, forgive myself. The shadows recoiled, their frantic movements stilled as the warmth of my light spread among them. My brother's expression shifted, the malice dissipating, replaced by acceptance, the sorrow within his gaze morphing into something softer. "Repentance, join us," he whispered once more, but this time it was not a command, it was an invitation. My heart raced, the battle between light and dark hanging in the balance. Finally, with a breath steeped in clarity, I walked forward towards them, the shadows who were once my very essence. The moment I stepped into their haunting presence, they loomed around me, folding into the warmth and light of what I had become. I felt warmth replace the cold, and as the figures melted into my being, something strange happened. The void around us began to dissolve, walls collapsing, shadows receding. With the final embrace, my heart resonated with an ancient song of resolution that pulled with it the whispers of the damned, the lost souls intertwining with my essence. But the light grew blinding, and as I surged forward, craving escape and release, realization struck like a thunderbolt: not everything would be fixed. The shadows still lingered. Even as the light surged within, the introspective truth remained. A part of me had joined them forever, forever caught in that intimate dance between light and dark. And I understood, while I could illuminate their stories, forever intertwined with my fate, that darkness I had faced, the darkness I had accepted would remain, even as I pulled forward into the light. With every heartbeat, I knew they were with me, echoes of my past whispering, reminding me as the final wall shattered behind, and so on I would go, forever sharing my path with the ghosts of whom I had once feared. For they would never truly leave, and neither would I.